You are listening to Awake in Relationship, a podcast about intimacy, community, and culture in a time of great change, with Silas Rose.
Hello, my name is Silas Rose, and you're tuned into Awake in Relationship. I don't know about you, but lately I've been finding it really hard to tune into the daily news. There's just so much trauma and upheaval happening in our world right now. Certainly we can't ignore the reality of a major land war in Europe. And I laud the courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people in response to this senseless aggression. But there's another news item that's dropped in the last couple of days that maybe has been kind of lost in the fog of war. And that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. That's painted a very kind of dire picture of our near future, with 3.5 billion people facing the worst effects of an unstable climate. It goes on to state that there's only so much that technology can do to fix this problem. We're going to have to adapt, and the window for change is really closing fast. So it seems timely to me to have this conversation on ecovillages and intentional community as one possible solution within reach. Ecovillages tick a lot of boxes in terms of integrating our needs for affordable housing, livelihood, and community that's in balance with our natural environment. I'm sure many listening are really on board with the idea of living in community, and perhaps you already are. But the reality is that many ecovillages start with a really idealistic vision, but fail when confronted with the messy complexity of human relationships and power dynamics. As humans, we evolved in small, intimate groups of maybe 150 people, sharing resources as a matter of survival. I really believe that evolutionary memory is deep in our brainstem somewhere, which is why it feels so horrible to feel isolated. We need each other more than ever as a community, but as we've learned after 2 years of COVID lockdowns, we also really love our freedom. To successfully transition to a low-carbon future, we're going to have to rediscover what it means to live in a cooperative culture. We need to reawaken our village, heart and mind. In this episode of Awake in Relationship, I speak with an old friend, Brandy Gallagher, educator, executive director, and manifester extraordinaire at One United Resource, Ecovillage in Shawnigan Lake, BC. In this conversation, we discuss the history of the Ecovillage movement, permaculture, and deep adaptation. We also discuss the on-the-ground realities of living in intentional community, including power struggles, conflict, and the possibilities of restoring a deep sense of family, connection, and belonging. If you're in that process of re-engineering your life towards something more sustainable and connected, this episode's for you. Brandy Gallagher, welcome to Awake in Relationship.
Thank you, Silas. I'm really grateful to be able to have this conversation with you coming in from OUR Ecovillage this morning.
This is very much a retrospective for me personally. As you know, I lived up there in Shawnigan Lake, circa, I think it was right after Y2K. And at that time, I certainly felt like the world was coming to an end. And looking back, I kind of wish we had the problems we had then now. So it's great to reconnect. And I want to start this conversation, just talk a little bit about your motivation for heading into the sticks and buying this beautiful 25 acres in Shawnigan Lake.
You know, Silas, I do want to just tap into you being here because I feel like you had an instrumental part in crafting part of the vision of here. And, you know, all the conversations and the dialogue we had during that time, it involved so many people. And I still have a drawing that you did all those years ago. It's like a carrot, and you sort of mapped out the elements of the village as people describe them. I think people talk it now as graphic storytelling, but you were able to encapsulate and visualize what people were saying in a different way. And I think that is kind of the bridge to the motivation for what brought together our Ecovillage for all of us. For myself personally, I would say being able to translate the story and the narrative of human beings' need at that time on the planet. So our Ecovillage actually started in the name, one united resource. And that interestingly came out of a visualization exercise. It was specifically a meditation and journeying practice with some medicine work that was being done in 1990. That name came forward. And we actually named our intentional community house in Victoria, our house, not to be confused with other OUR houses in Victoria, but we were over in View Royal. As much as it was to be in an urban setting for a number of us who came to Victoria because we were going to school or had different reasons for being in more of an urban setting, having come from much more of a rural and wild space setting myself, historically, that brought together those of us who were kind of transplanted into the city in a way, yet we're trying to deeply listen to what is needed in our culture, in societies, in humanity right now. And that really was the birthplace of our Ecovillage.
Your background is social work, so it's an interesting kind of transition. Well, what's the link there for you?
You know, I left home very young, and I grew up in the 60s. I grew up in a commune and on reserve with First Peoples and hippies. It's clearly not the path to mainstream cultural understanding. And I had a tough time integrating at all into mainstream culture, especially as a teenager. You can only bluff your way through for so long, which teenagers are very adept at, but I wasn't. And so eventually my sense of justice was so strong that I really thought I was going to become a lawyer. I went to work for government because I wanted to know the belly of the ecosystem and understand how it worked. And my poor parents, they were like, "Oh, we tried so hard. How did she decide to go to become a lawyer? You know, we thought we did better than that." Other families wanted their kids to become doctors and lawyers. And I had a different kind of familial circle. And so I really did set myself to being in the ecosystem of systems of regulatory processes and government, and trying to understand how our society worked in that way. And what was that? Instead of being afraid of it, I wanted to go to the center of it. And oh my goodness, Silas, that really had to lead me to going back to therapeutic work after that. So, you know, that's kind of a roundabout answer to it really brought me full circle to understanding that we need to have a recovery program for the trauma and cultural disconnect of mainstream and Western culture. We're so far removed from our own DNA as villagers, and the sense of relationship and relatedness with all beings. I found it extremely painful at that time. I had a lot of losses in that 15 years of my life. And I wrote a outrageous statement to the School of Social Work thinking, well, they will never take me after I state these things. And it actually was what had me go into the School of Social Work, which I must commend UVics program because they were feminist, First Nations, structuralist, anti-oppression social work. And I don't think anybody was really talking that language in the early 90s too much. And I really had an incredible journey there of setting out not to become a social worker, but really considering what does people care mean in the permaculture framework of earth care, people care, and seeing that fair share was really all wound up in what people might call social work, but working for planet, place, and processes that are current really became the work of the day.
There's been so much change over the last 20 years, and it is interesting that our lives, you and I, seem to intersect in these kind of major cultural, global kind of flashpoints. As I mentioned, when we first really connected was around Y2K, just before 9/11. Are you feeling more hopeful about the future or less at this point?
What flashed to me in your question was Stephen Jenkinson, who just dashes the word hope on the rocks. I don't know that I relate to the word hope after being in discourse with Stephen. In fact, it's not a helpful word for me in the sense that it's almost all imaginary. And so maybe if I switch that to how am I with going into a certainly uncertain future, I would say that I just have this immense sense of privilege to be alive at this time of unprecedented change in so many ways. The world has experienced whatever is the nexus of pandemic culture before. And yet I'm sure it was never like what's going on now. So I'm in awe of the future and even the present, in the sense that, that ego state of thinking what's going on. I feel grateful that I don't have to lean into that position anymore of trying to figure it out or have that ego place of knowing what's going on. Like, really, I perhaps we all start in that place where we know we don't know and we can just live in wonder. Now I feel we have this opportunity to return there. It's almost like a childlike state of kindness and care in the presencing of that.
It's a very kind of sober analysis in some level. I know in Ecovillage circles, permacultural circles, there's a lot of talk about this notion of deep adaptation. And maybe I'll let you kind of define that, but my understanding is that sort of acknowledging that we've kind of overshot in a big way. And at this point, we have to really just figure out how we're going to survive and live good lives given the current situation on the planet. What's your understanding of deep adaptation?
That's a really good question, because as a permaculture teacher and an Ecovillage design teacher and a consultant and all the landscape of the legal and regulatory work that I do and group process work, it's very tangible. And I think my previous answers might sound slightly esoteric on some level. I do actually feel like that's part of deep adaptation. We need to have our roots in the ground and our awareness in the unknown. And that is perhaps, in my mind, the path forward to deep adaptation. This kind of rigid structuring of it has to be this way, or it is so, might be evolving now, or we must evolve or perish. That old statement. I believe that deep adaptation is really the process of us allowing ourselves there and not trying to hold on to what once was, or a belief system that can't be deconstructed in order to evolve into what is needed. And that's a big part. I do a lot of kind of emergency planning, and sometimes you have to do that in rapid fire sequence. The house is on fire, boom, let's go. That's a deep adaptation. Some people cannot adapt on that level. They go to reaction, they go to fight, flight, or freeze, and cannot respond. So I like this idea that we're learning how to get out of our reactive state into our response, and to be able to interact and, in fact, co-regulate in that space.
That really gets to the heart of the community part.
Oh, relationships.
Yes. So that's for those that are not familiar with One United Resource Ecovillage. Give us the elevator pitch, and how do you define an ecovillage?
Well, it really depends on who you're talking to, and who is asking the question. On the website, you'll be told that we are a 25-acre regenerative living demonstration site and education center. We are an intersection of government, business and corporate, even, academia, and much the grassroots of community and the NGOs and so forth involved in the day-to-day of who is community. And we'll often say that those stakeholder groups all need to be present in order to create the impact that's needed in designing our lives towards regeneration. With that being said, on the ground, we are a whole series of demonstrated precedent work. So long ago, in the year 2000-ish, even with the visioning work with yourself, we began designing for the ecosystem of an eco-village. What would want to be here? What are those activities? And then we ran into the interesting conversation of, it's not legal to live sustainably. You can't be all those things on one piece of land. There's something called land use zoning. And curiously, in those days, I think we were just so naive and so enthusiastic, like ridiculously optimistic is what I coined it as, outrageously optimistic. We actually asked to be part of the legal and regulatory work of land use zoning with our local government. And hats off to the CVRD, the Cowichan Valley Regional District, because perhaps they were trying to say no a lot to us. And we turned around and said, really, no is just an uneducated yes. Let's just learn how to do it, and let's learn together. And our crazy level of enthusiasm, I think, had people kind of taken aback, and we weren't roadblocked as much as you might imagine, and like so many other places had run into and still do run into. So we achieved a land use zoning in 2002, which had us become a park, protected space, a school. So we're an education center, and basically the entire 25 acres. That's not about classrooms per se. The land is the classroom. We are a farm. We're a non-certified organic farm. And we are allowed to have a residential village of 10 homes on the 25 acres. We're allowed unlimited businesses related to agriculture. We're allowed one for-profit business, and we're allowed accommodation and food services as it relates to learners being here. And so we were at 10,000 learners a year pre-pandemic.
Yeah, it's an incredibly busy place. Every time I visit, there's just so much going on.
I would say that part of that is curiously there's tens of thousands of eco-villages and intentional communities on the planet right now. We're a large movement. OUR Ecovillage is part of the Ecovillages Canada, which is part of the Global Ecovillage Network of North America, which is part of the Global Ecovillage Network on the planet. So we're not in this alone. And, really, there's nothing new happening here, even though it's award-winning and it seems so innovative. Folks are doing this all over the planet. And in fact, most of design work is really traditional knowledge from somewhere on the planet, and it's been approved and or alive and well for time back from humanity. So this isn't quite as I like to say there's nothing new here. It's just that it's all happening in one place, and that is how eco-villages are coined. It's a full featured human settlement. So you're wanting the ecological, the social, the environmental, the financial or economic, and the worldview, all to weave itself into that revillaging design.
So for anyone that's interested in starting something, it's not like you have to reinvent the wheel.
Oh, goodness, no. And I really feel like there's a lot of people doing that. There's this cultural propensity for, I'm going to do it my way. And there's something to be said for traditional knowledge and legacy and heritage. Why would I reinvent the wheel? Why would anybody go down the track of trying to determine how to do the legal work of these situations? We had an 8-year law project with legal and regulatory leadership to look at this across Canada. Why wouldn't somebody lean into that? And it's a curiosity these days because there's this rugged individualism in the Western culture, and particularly in North America, like, I'm going to do it better. And for sure, we need to lean into that. And there's so much to learn from the history and the community or the network of everyone that's been doing it before. It's not like there's a right way. It's more that there's so many lessons learned. And I think that running ahead or trying to go off on your own and do it is kind of the opposite of revillaging.
On the topic of leaning in, Jean-Paul Sartre, the famous French playwright and philosopher, famously said, hell is other people. And I assume that many people listening to this podcast are probably, are curious or interested in the idea of living in community, but, and it's hard work. In some situations, sometimes it can feel like living in a pressure cooker. What is the edge that anyone new to this kind of way of life inevitably runs up against?
That's a curious way to ask the question, because a lot of people in the global movement that are real change agents talk about being edge walkers. And in permaculture design, we talk about the edge is where the action is. It's kind of the intertidal zone of the robustness and the complexity of the ecosystem. Human interaction and community building is very complex. And yet, like nature, I believe it runs by simple laws. Whether it's the 4 agreements or the principles of eco-village design, whether it's group dynamics understanding or, the simple pull of gravity, there is an essence to relatedness and connection that is the authenticity, I believe, of who we really are. Now, we also need to recognize that we were trained and socialized into being who we're really not. Well, let's just call this culture right now. And that culture currently for Western ways is based in colonization, capitalism, competition, like all the things that are the other C words that are not community and collective and cooperative. So in essence, we need to probably go through a very large change or deep adaptation process to come to community. And I think that's the tricky part, because at certain times in our life, we often think we know the answer to things and or the way to do it. And maybe that's the unlearning in Western culture, or the adaptation part is, how do I surrender to, the grand statement of we are all one? That's a beautiful meditation. And how do I live that? It's super messy and unkind at times. It's a major rite of passage to live in community, and particularly if it's not just with human beings, that there's this placemaking that happens when we do this. If we don't consider our house a thing or an object, but our relatedness to place. I mean, there's some people who are doing work right now. I think of the new tribe training that's going on. And it's curious, but they talk about committing themselves to place for the rest of their lives. And at first I thought, oh, that's weird. It's almost what I've done. But I came to understand, I might not live at our Ecovillage for the rest of my life, but my commitment is to the place for the rest of my life. I could be in Siberia and I'm still a stand for community and this particular community, if I could help in some way. And perhaps I'm not that helpful in some ways, but having said all that, I feel like we get to recognize that this is deep cultural work. And there has to be a willingness to completely change our lives in being crafted in community building, because we're not just building the community is crafting us as well. And you want that to be in the most healthy way.
That's the pressure cooker element, that we are on some level getting cooked.
Yeah, it's the heat gets turned up, most certainly. And it's painful to see myself and my projections in other people's response, to see the culture I live in the cauldron of a group. It's so painful. It's heartbreaking. And, for me, I realize it is actually the opportunity to let our heart break 1,000 times over. We come into community quite often with this romance, like it's all going to be apple pie and roses. And we're going to sit pastorally out in the food forest and just watch everything grow. I always work with groups as a consultant and describe the deep level of impact that will happen and the choice to be impacted that way, and how to surrender into that journey. And, the word intimacy, when it's broken down, is into me see. And so how will I be willing to be fully seen? And how will I be willing to see other humans in all of our imperfections? Because, we're pretty trained up to be looking good and to be right and to pull it off. But in our most authentic selves, if we don't have to be all those things and we truly allow ourselves to be messy critters who mess up a lot, we hurt each other's feelings. We do or say things that have not positive impacts, and not to protect that and think, maybe to think we're doing our best, that really none of us has ill intention, and we still screw up a lot. So how do we get real with that and then fall in love with each other in that very unfortunate way of being that we can be, and still come to the next place? Most people didn't have family-centered experiences where people learn how to fight fair, or how to be angry at each other in a healthy way, and then get to the next place. It's all about where you go with that. It's like trauma is really an experience, and then how do I metabolize it? Well, that is deeply embedded in all our relationships. The trauma of not knowing that there is a healing process on the other side of that experience.
My sense is it takes a really strong container to do that work, because there is so much kind of shadow that surfaces when you're in a community with others, and intense emotional energy. I often wonder if that's why many intentional communities fail.
Well, there's a cliche that 95% of communities fail in the first 5 years. And it's often denoted because of structural dysfunction is the term that was utilized in Diana Leaf Christian's work, Creating a Life Together. And, Diana and I used to work together, and it had me really on the path of creating structure, why I threw myself into policy and legal work to the nth degree. Curiously, underneath that, I started to listen to one of my dear mentors of the time, Lynn Curtis, and he said this phrase that I think is great for all of us to think about, but really that, let me try and get this as well as I can. It's not about the letter of the law, it's about the spirit of the intent. And if we aren't coming from a collaborative worldview, even knowing that we've never had any skill development in that area in our culture, like where would we learn that skill? If we don't go into that deep adaptation, the letter of the law will be used against us, not to become functional, not to make it past that 5 years. We'll use it against each other. And that happens in intentional communities and ecovillages all the time. In the North American sense in particular, people are all running out and buying land together, and they're not really doing the work of the group building previously. It's kind of treating it like real estate. And that's an unfortunate term. It's objectifying place in a very disconnect kind of pattern. And then what happens is the humans get together, and then the forming, storming, norming, and performing unfolds, and quite often doesn't get past the storming phase of that group process.
So you've been at the center of this kind of incredible process for over 20 years. And you're really kind of one of the people I have in mind when I think of someone that really knows how to kind of manifest. So I sort of see you as, this kind of master chef in the kitchen, slaving away. And so I think you're probably pretty familiar with that, the heat in the kitchen. How is this Ecovillage journey that you've been on? Really, how's it changed you?
I was in a conversation with a couple of other Ecovillage founders and folks that are part of the global Ecovillage network, which is such an important aspecting, I think, of this Ecovillage, OUR, because we're really in that bigger web and the thinking behind them. And we were talking about, as an elders council, how we have been crafted by this journey. And I would say we talked about how much we messed up in the journey, and how in permaculture, we often talk about fail early, fail often. That's the way to learn. And I would say we all described how our own personalities, our history, our own traumas have played into the delicate journey of breaking apart as a human being to live in a communal setting and create cooperative culture. And so I would say I have failed early and failed often a lot. And that is what has crafted me. And my own kind of attachments and how that showed up. I lost my family when I was quite young, and was off in the world in a way at quite a young age. So having to learn how to be with people has been a big part of my journey. But the other really big part, I think, is that whole idea of being family and people use those terms very loosely, like, hey brother, I'm with you. And it's bantered around in a very I would say unfortunate way, because family is something that also is very triggering for people. It's our place of, some of our greatest hardship and the place of our deepest love. And so to really be able to love fully and accept each other for all our differences and all of our failings or shortcomings or missteps that we make. A lot of people never had that experience in our own families. So how are we going to do it together? And I feel like that has crafted me a lot. I think I'm a difficult person in the setting of that, just because of my own attachments. And also kind of the honor code that I carry. And so I've had to give up some of that. I realize being in community, really have to compromise probably about easily 60% of the way I have held my way of being in the world, and find a different path or a middle road.
Earlier on, we were talking about that edge, the inevitable rough spots that we encounter when we start to explore living in community. What do you think is the reward on the other side of the edge? What's the heart of it?
I would say the reason 10,000 people have connected through here a year is this deep longing for belonging. This deep call to really know the interconnectedness of all of us. And, perhaps that sounds kind of esoteric, but on so many levels, what drives us to be alive? And I believe community calls us from that same place. How do we become more vital, more awoken? Awaken is the whole title of this podcast. And that, I think, is the call to really help each other on that journey. And I don't know that you'll get that all by yourself on a mountaintop in a cave meditating about it. Maybe parts of that happen that way, but it's only through human connection and maybe other being connection as well. I think that we're going to get to that place of longing in any fulfillment. So I think that the tricky thing is, Scott Peck talked about this as well. It's the single most elusive feeling you'll ever have, because that moment of exhale, you're like, wow, we are all connected. Suddenly you blink and it changes again. And something happens. So it's such a generative process, and it's such a cyclical, spiraling process to be in relationship that it's just the journey. It's not a destination community. It's not even a place. It's creating community. And it's never over. So yeah. And even here, it's never over, because we have some of our founders and early members here, and they actually are part of our green burial project. So it's really not over.
Something that's coming up as you're saying that, there's a Buddhist prophecy about the future Buddha, Maitreya, that Buddha would be a community.
I think that's on our website as a tagline, but the next Buddha will come in the form of a community. And I do. I believe the most successful, if we want to use that term, or the most achieving community projects are where people really understand themselves as being on a spiritual journey in that relatedness element. And it's not to kind of like bring images of cult or leadership, followership kind of notions. I think really that is why maybe that quote was made by Thich Nhat Hanh, I believe, is that we need to stop making people into leaders that are who we hold to blame as well. think that's the biggest challenge of founding an eco-village is you're then forever to blame for everything. It's a funny oxymoron that the way we behave. And, it's often said that we set up leaders just to take them down. Mm-hmm. So who wants to be responsible for that job description? Mm-hmm. But the idea of actually spreading that out into a collective responsibility in the world, that is appealing. And I think that's probably the other advice I would give in revillaging is that we all step forward as leaders, not where we're in politics with each other, but where we're essentially our nature is to lead and to be ambassadors of that.
That's a lovely place to end. It's been so awesome reconnecting with you, Brandy. Thank you. And how can people find out more about the Ecovillage and your work?
Well, I think a great start place is to come to our website, which is simply OUR Ecovillage.org, and then come for a visit. If you're at a distance and you're not on Vancouver Island, there's eco-villages across Canada and across the world. So if not here, then there, wherever there might be. But right now, our United Nations has actually looked towards eco-villages as, I'm not sure if they're the quote of lifeboats for the future. But as we go into climate crisis on the levels that are ahead, I don't know if you saw the IPCC report that came out today. We need to find a way to do it different. And you were describing manifesting. We all need to step up as manifestors of the collective. We all need to manifest a future that will exist for humanity and this planet in a very different way. It's also going to mean supporting each other to let go of a lot and going into a deep adaptation. And we need each other. We really do. Once we recognize where we're at, maybe we'll let go of this kind of, especially North American way of rugged individualism and not needing each other. But when we get to the place of actually really adapting to needing each other and being able to take that in, I think we'll find each other all over the planet. So start wherever you are, whether you're urban, rural, large, small groups of people. Get everyone on your street to revillage together. Create your street that you live on in a city or in a suburb to become an eco-village, because it's not really about the name. It's really about choosing a way to live and to be in the world and together.
It was such a pleasure to reconnect with Brandy after so many years. Certainly the time I spent up at the Ecovillage back in 2000 was really kind of a formative time for me. So it's been really wonderful to hear the evolution of that wonderful project. If you want to learn more about Brandy Gallagher or One United Resource Ecovillage, head over to OUR Ecovillage.org. I'll be sure to put a link in the show notes at awakenrelationship.com. If you've been enjoying the content on Awaken Relationship, I really appreciate just taking a quick moment and sharing some stars on Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. Or better yet, forward this episode on to a friend. It really helps me to grow the show, so thank you. I always welcome feedback and ideas for future guests, so please reach out. You can find me on Twitter or Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn. Or you can send me a message through the contact page on my website. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Until next time, stay connected.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Awake in Relationship. If you liked what you heard, please click subscribe to get the latest show delivered fresh to your device, or sign up for our newsletter at awakeinrelationship.com. Sharing is caring.